Hello everyone, welcome to our Module 11 lecture video where we will be talking a little bit about how to formulate our persuasive speeches. Now we're also going to be talking about this a lot in our video conference, so this is just more a comprehensive look at what we're going to dive into deeper in our Module 11 video conference, where I will give specific details about our speech that we're going to give, and you already have access to that folder, so you can go ahead and be looking over the material you need to formulate your persuasive speech. But like I said, we're just going to hit the basics today. We've heard a lot of it before, so this is going to be some reminders. My cat in the background, but I'm not going to start over because she's cute. Okay, let's go ahead and move in. So for our persuasive speaking, the goal, obviously, we talked about this when we were talking about audience analysis, but the goal is to influence audience members, either their attitudes, their beliefs, their values, or we are trying to persuade them to take action for something. And so as we talked about before, remember, it's easiest to change your audience's attitudes. It is much harder to change an audience member's beliefs or their deep-seated values. And it is difficult, we haven't talked about this one before, but it's relatively difficult to get your audience to take action against something. But in our specific speeches, that is what we are going to hope for. We will be presenting a claim of policy, and we want our audience members to do something about it. And that's what our call to action is going to be at the end. So in order to tap into how to persuade our audience, I know we already went through how to inform our audience about a topic. And of course, that is persuasive in and of itself because we want our audience to care about what we are informing them about. But here we are actually trying to really appeal to our audience and either convince them to do something or convince them something that they need to take action against something. And in order to do that, we really need to tap into the audience's motivation. So make sure, as always, that the message is personally relevant to your listeners. So this is especially important in a persuasive speech because while an informative speech might be something new that they've never heard of and they may or may not have interest in, but we want them to. This is really important because we want to make sure that we really tap into that target audience. We really need to use that we language, and we really need to convince the audience that obviously what we're talking about and persuading them to either believe or change their attitude about something, we need to clearly demonstrate the benefit to the audience for what we are claiming. Really important in a persuasive speech, as always, again, is to establish your credibility. So if you are just spewing off your own opinion about something that's not substantiated in fact or ethos, it is really hard to change your audience's, even their attitudes about something. Make sure you set modest goals, right? So we're not going to be able to change everyone's political opinion in a 4 to 5 minute speech, and luckily that's not what the prompt is, but this is just, again, a grand scheme if you're ever having to give a persuasive speech about something. Again, make sure that you're sticking with maybe a small attitude change or convincing them to take action for a policy that you're promoting. It's really, again, difficult to change your audience's deep-seated values or their belief about something. And then obviously appeal to what motivates your audience members. So encourage a receptivity to change and recognize that motives arise from needs, right? And so if I'm persuading you that this information is important to know and that you need to know this, you're motivated by grades, right? And so I use that as an incentive, like, hey, this is going to be on the quiz, so you should listen to it. That should word indicates persuasiveness, right? You're motivated by grades, and so using that appeals to your wants and your needs, and maybe will convince you to pay attention to this material and care about this material, right? I additionally think that this material is important just for your life and to have good communication skills, But I do know that my students are motivated by their grades. So appeal to your audience from what motivates them and what they care about. So we've already talked about this a bunch because I think it's important to incorporate this into every speech that you have, as did Aristotle. But persuasion happens through the persuasive appeals of ethos, pathos, and logos. And so I'm just going to do a quick review of these because we have talked about them before, but it's a good refresher going into our persuasive speeches. But obviously, I already talked about how ethos and you as a speaker, your credibility is important, especially important when giving a persuasive speech, because we want to trust you as a speaker. We want to think you have upstanding moral character, that you are trustworthy, that you have our best interests in mind as an audience. And so I think about politicians a lot. If a politician does not seem like they have an upstanding moral character or they're trustworthy, we're far less likely to be persuaded by what they have to say. So we must view the speaker as credible, and that increases the audience's level of receptivity. That just means how we receive that message and how we decode that message and are persuaded by that message ultimately. And so I know it's interesting in our modern time because there are two sides of the debate, right, to President Trump. And so people might think that he might not have the most upstanding moral character. I'm not stating my own opinion. That's just an argument. But a lot of people do find him trustworthy because he ran on a platform in the campaign in 2016 that he was going to drain the swamp and that he wasn't a politician and he was one of them, one of the people, and he was a successful businessman. And so a lot of the times he was appealing to that ethos as opposed to maybe his moral character. So that just to keep that in mind of why do people listen to messages like that and are persuaded by messages like that? A huge part of it is that they see the speaker as credible and trustworthy and that they have the audience's interests in mind. Next is pathos, of course, the appeal to emotion. And a really great way to appeal to emotion always is to paint us a picture of something, maybe really devastating or really heartwarming. That's a way to tug at the audience's heartstrings, is use that language to paint us a picture and use narratives and tell compelling stories. A lot of you did this in your informative speeches of news articles. You told us about images that were being used to convey pathos and to appeal to the audience's sense of emotion. People are persuaded all the time based on emotion because they, again, feel passionate about something due to their emotional response to seeing something or hearing something. Another way to do this is using repetition and parallelism. And so again, when Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech, the I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream, when he used that, but also painted us a picture using vivid imagery, when he talked about, the rolling plains and things like that, he was appealing to the audience's sense of emotion in that moment. And make sure your emotional appeals are based on sound reasoning. Again, you can't just go off an opinion, but if you're describing an image or describing something that actually happened, you're also using logos. So it's recommended that you combine that ethos and that logos for best effect and that pathos all together. Because if you don't, it can sound like you're just painting a picture of something that doesn't exist. And so you need to base that in fact and your own speaker credibility as well. Next, of course, is logos, and this is your appeal to reason. This is using those facts, that logic, that statistics. And this is critical when you're asking your audience to reach conclusions regarding complicated issues or to take a specific action. So a lot of the time, the climate change debate and the fact that we need to take action to help our environment is based off of logos alone and statistics and facts. And you can see how that is definitely vital to the argument. But if you use logos without appealing to that pathos and that ethos, that speaker credibility, people aren't as compelled to take action if you just drown us with a bunch of numbers and a bunch of statistics. So while they can be compelling and striking, you need to root those in reality by both using pathos and ethos to balance out those numbers. Okay, and last we're going to talk about something a little bit new. So we went through things that you have heard about before and talked about how they're important in persuasive speeches. But here we're going to talk about elements of an argument. So you have your claim, and this is your proposition to the audience. This is going to be your thesis statement, right, in your persuasive policy speech. And this is what you want your audience to believe by the end of the speech. And this is obviously based on your evidence, using ethos, pathos, logos, that supporting material, whether that be facts, statistics, narratives, expert testimony, etc. So you have your claim, and then you have evidence, right, that supports your claim. And the most confusing part about this model, which we call the Toulmin model, is the warrant. And so the warrant connects your claim and your evidence. So think of it as a bridge connecting your claim and your evidence. The warrant provides reasons that the evidence is valid to support your claim. So let's use an example. So if I was trying to persuade you that President Trump was a good president, right, which would be a claim that I was trying to make. So let's say my claim was President Trump is a good president, and I used evidence that was, well, Hillary Clinton is not a good person. That doesn't really connect, right? That is missing that warrant in between that makes the claim and the evidence connect. So the fact that Hillary Clinton, that I'm claiming, not really, this is just a hypothetical example, but if I claim that Hillary Clinton was a bad person as my evidence, that doesn't really back up my claim necessarily that President Trump is the best president, right? And so missing that link, which actually happens more than you suspect, I used a really obvious one, but if it's missing that link, your evidence does not back up your claim in a clear way that would be compelling to the audience. So read more about this in your textbook. It talks about the Toulmin model and how you need a solid warrant that can be implied but also can be stated clearly that says, hey, this evidence actually appeals to my claim that I'm making. Okay, and while we're on the topic of claims, I want to talk about 3 different types of claims that we can make in a persuasive speech. So first is a claim of fact, and so this is declaring or arguing that something is true or will not happen. So if I was making the argument and trying to persuade you that, yes, President Trump will win for sure in 2020, this is actually a claim of fact because I am stating that this will happen and this is true. Whether or not, it is true, it is still a claim of fact because I am saying that something will happen and that it is true that it will happen. And I'm going to try to persuade you that I know it will happen, right? And so that would be an example of a claim of fact. Another claim of fact would be the Earth is going to die in 12 years or whatever that is because of climate change. That is a claim of fact because I'm claiming that this is true and this will happen. So next, a little bit different, is a claim of value. And so this is addressing issues of judgment. So this would be like the example I used in the previous slide. If my claim was President Trump is the best president that we've ever had, that would be an issue of judgment. I am trying to persuade you that something is the best or something is good, and it's more subjective evidence, right? And this is more a matter of opinion. While the first one can also be a matter of opinion because it's being persuaded, it's based more in fact and claims of logos. This one is a little bit more subjective and a little bit more based on those attitudes, right? Because attitudes are whether something is good or bad. And so that would be a claim of value. And then lastly, we're going to focus on a claim of policy in our persuasive policy speeches that we're giving, hence the name persuasive policy speeches. But I will talk about the prompt a little bit in, of course, our Module 11 conference. But just an overview, a claim of policy is recommending that a specific course of action be taken. And so this would be just a really clear example that Lime scooters should be banned from campus because that would be, or Texas Tech should ban Lime scooters from campus because this is a policy that Texas Tech would adopt if I persuaded you to do so and I persuaded the council to do so. That would be a policy issue that we'd want to debate. And there are claims of policy all over the place in our politics, right? That healthcare should be universal and this should be a policy that we adopt as a nation. That would be a claim of policy that I am trying to persuade you of. So we talked about our claims. Now we're moving on to our evidence, right? And so examples of evidence, this would be our supporting material that we already did a lecture about. So go back and watch that if you need a refresher. But external evidence would be examples that we talked about, narratives, testimony, facts, and statistics. Again, I did an entire lecture on this, so go back and watch it if you need a refresher. But also the audience's pre-existing knowledge and opinions. So if you are a persuasive speaker, it's helpful to reaffirm the listener's own attitudes, beliefs, and values, which is why that audience analysis is so important, and understanding where your audience is coming from when they walk into that room to hear you. And so we talked about how to do that a little bit: polls, surveys, focus groups, just doing some research of demographics and how people, maybe in this part of the country are more likely to view things, right? And our age group, what is our age group more likely to view things as? So if you're reaffirming your audience, again, this would be like if a presidential candidate went to their own rally, they're reaffirming to their audience what they know their beliefs to be. Because if you're going to a rally for someone that you support, the speaker obviously knows that more than likely you support them and you already support the policies that they are claiming there. And then also your evidence can be your speaker expertise. And so this is often, it's not supposed to be often, not offer, but in conjunction with other evidence. So this would be your own expertise on the matter, your own ethos, your own credibility that ties in to other people's opinions and expert testimonies and things like that. So those are some examples of evidence. Again, go back and watch that supporting material lecture if you need some clarification. And finally, warrants. So this is what I talked about, the really important link between your evidence and your claim. And so motivational warrants would be appealing to an audience's needs and emotions, and this is, of course, based on pathos. And so if you're connecting your evidence to your claim using an emotional appeal, maybe a really gripping story, saying that this story matters because this, that would be a motivational warrant. You can also use an authoritative warrant, which would be appeals to your source's credibility. This is based on ethos. So let's say, again, my claim is that the Earth, which would be a claim of fact, but the Earth is going to die in 12 years due to climate change. And if I used evidence based on the World Health Organization or things like that and scientists there, I would connect my evidence to my claim by saying something like, these scientists are experts in their field, and therefore that makes this evidence credible and important to my claim, right? So that statement in and of itself would be a warrant because I am connecting my evidence to my claim by saying, this person isn't just some random person walking off the street. They know what they're talking about, and if they're predicting that the Earth is going to die, then we need to take action, right? So that would be connecting your evidence to your claim. If I just said, Joe Schmo off the street says this, and I use that as my evidence, well, that doesn't really tie back necessarily to my claim very well because it may not be relevant what Joe Schmo thinks, right? And then you can use substantive warrants. And so this uses factual evidence to justify an argument based on logos. And so this can be a warrant by cause and a warrant by analogy. So again, this is just connecting your evidence back to your claim by stating that this causes this, right? It can be a causal effect. So if I use this evidence by saying, oh, look at all the trees that are dying. This is just, again, a random example. I would say global warming is a cause of that, and therefore clearly we only have 12 years before the Earth dies. That would be a causal effect there, connecting the two. And then a warrant by analogy. So stating, if I was making the claim that, look, the Earth is going to die in 12 years, and then I have evidence that is, let's say that maybe this has happened before or something. Let's say if we had evidence that on Mars this happened exactly as it's happening here, there were CO2 emissions and things like that. And if I said, hey, my evidence that I used from Mars is relevant to the evidence that we have here on Earth because these two things are parallel and they can be connected by an analogy. So that was a little confusing, but basically it just means that if your evidence is citing a similar case to your claim, you need to make sure that you connect it with a warrant by stating this situation is similar to ours and therefore should be a warning that we need to take action on our planet because it happened on another planet, right? So again, warrants are just important because they make sure your evidence actually backs up your claim in an important way. And sometimes it's helpful to spell that out to the audience because maybe they don't see that this analogy is relevant or that this can cause this, right? Which would be what a warrant is for. And so those are the three different types of warrants that can be based on pathos, ethos, or logos. And more information, again, is available to you in your textbook that talks about the Toulmin model and how claim, evidence, and warrants are important. But if you have any questions about this material, the Toulmin model is kind of confusing, and I've had students in the past who maybe don't grasp it the first time. But if you have any questions, please let me know. Toulmin is also spelled Toulin. So, just so you know, that's how you spell that. And if you need any if you have any questions about that, let me know. And so just know that make sure your evidence supports your claim and you are showing the audience that your evidence actually does support your claim. That's the basic knowledge that you need to have on warrants. Okay, that's all I have for today for our talking about our persuasive speeches. This is just, again, a big picture, 10,000 foot view of how we can appeal to our audience. But I will be diving in a little bit more detail when we have our Module 11 video conference. So again, if you have any questions, let me know, but I will see you then.